My son texted me just after lunch, not to ask how I was, not to say he missed me, but to tell me I wasn't welcome. The words were short, clipped, and cold. "You won't be joining us." My wife prefers to keep it just their side of the family tonight, and just like that, in one message, the family I had poured my life into closed the door on me. This story happened in the state of Massachusetts, and it starts long before that text ever lit up my phone. There was a time I believed the secret to keeping a family close was simple. You keep the kettle warm, the back door unlocked, and the light on for whoever might be late getting home. You bake more bread than you need because someone will always want a second slice. You stitch the name of every newborn into a blanket before the ink on their birth certificate dries. You save every crayon drawing because one day they'll be too grown up to hand you one. You remember which grandchild likes their eggs runny and which likes them scrambled. You make Saturday pancakes even when you're tired. You drive across town in the rain just to drop off the lemon cookies your daughter-in-law likes. You show up at the school plays with flowers that cost more than you'd planned. You pretend not to notice when the gas tank is mysteriously full after your son borrows the car, because that's how love works, in small trades and quiet favors. I lived in the same yellow house for 43 years, long enough that the street trees felt like family and the mailman knew my birthday. My porch steps remembered every pair of sneakers, every pair of work boots, every toddler barefoot dash. And I really thought, if I kept this house full of food and warmth and stories, it would always pull my family back like the tide. I thought traditions were ropes you could hold onto in the dark. But there are things you don't see when you're busy setting the table, the glances that pass between other people when you speak. The way visits get shorter without explanation. The moments you're suddenly outside the conversation without knowing when it started. I didn't notice them, not then, or maybe I didn't want to, because I thought love was enough. I thought my son, the boy who used to run into my arms after school smelling like crayons and autumn leaves, would remember what this house meant. I thought he'd remember the birthday cakes baked even when the power was out, the nights I stayed up sewing costumes, the mornings I sat in the cold car just so it would be warm when he left for work. I thought wrong. I didn't pay attention then. I wish I had, because the truth is, the cracks in a family don't start with earthquakes. They start with hairline lines in the walls you've walked past 100 times, and one day you wake up and someone sends you a text that feels like a lock clicking shut, and you realize the door's been closing for years. And that's when I realized even a house full of love can feel empty when the people you love have quietly moved their hearts somewhere else. But I wasn't yet ready to say it out loud. There was a time I believed the space between people could only grow if someone moved away, a different city, a new job, a house too far to walk to. But I learned that you can lose someone even when they're just 10 minutes down the road. That silence can grow roots right there in your neighborhood. The first crack didn't feel like a crack. It came in the shape of a little blue notification on my phone, a text, mid-afternoon, simple and short, almost polite, except it wasn't. "You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep it just their side of the family tonight." I read it once, twice, a third time, as if more pauses over the words would reveal a hidden joke. There wasn't one. I stood in my kitchen with the oven timer ticking down behind me and typed back something cheerful, something safe. "Okay, have a lovely evening," and I added a heart I didn't feel. The kettle began to hiss, the same sound it always made, but somehow it felt sharper, like it was warning me that something here was boiling over. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe there wasn't enough food, maybe her family had traveled in, maybe she was tired and didn't want to host too many people. I wrapped those excuses around myself like a shawl that wouldn't quite stay on. but then came the second time, and the third, and after that I stopped being surprised when the phone stayed silent. The changes were small, like someone rearranging furniture while you're asleep. The midweek calls with my grandkids stopped. Instead of a FaceTime where I could see their faces, I'd get a short text, "Too busy this week, Ma, we'll call soon." But soon didn't come. The front door, the same one I'd kept unlocked for 40 years because I trusted the world outside it, started staying closed. The doorbell didn't ring. The extra place at the table stayed empty. And the leftovers began to last longer. In the fridge, because there weren't extra mouths to feed. And it wasn't just the absences. Little things around the house began to shift in ways that didn't make sense. The old wooden spoon I'd had since my wedding, the one with a burn mark from the night my husband made chili, disappeared from the counter. 2 weeks later, it reappeared in the drawer as if it had never been gone. The jar where I kept laundry quarters was suddenly light, though I hadn't done any extra loads. Then there were the smells. A whiff of perfume I didn't own lingering. In the hallway, a faint tang of wine on a glass I knew I hadn't poured. Once, a sharp, lemony scent like cleaning spray I'd never bought. They were there and gone so quickly I almost convinced myself I imagined them. Almost. I heard things too, at the church pantry, over the steam of a soup pot. 2 women whispered just within earshot. They say it started after the wedding. She doesn't let him visit alone anymore. I kept stirring, pretending I didn't hear, but my hands shook enough that the ladle rattled against the pot. Then, one snowy Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Avery from across the street came to my porch. With a handful of mail, found these on the curb, she said, some envelopes opened, some not. She didn't mention the cigarette, but I noticed by the steps, no one in my house smoked, and no one should have been on my porch without me knowing. The text messages continued. Each one dressed up as casual, each one another brick in a wall I hadn't agreed to build. She's simplifying the guest list. We already ate by the time I saw your call. Don't bother baking this Sunday. We've got it covered. That word stuck in my mind. Covered with what? With who? And then came the moment that made the hair rise on my arms. I was dusting the coffee table, moving my Bible to wipe underneath it, when I noticed the book felt heavier than usual. I opened it, and out slid a yellowed envelope, its corners soft with age. My name was on the front, written in my late husband's careful hand. The air in the room changed, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. I sat on the rug without thinking, the envelope in my lap, my knees finding the spot by the table where I'd knelt so many nights to pray for this family. I didn't open it, not yet. Because I knew, the moment I did, something about my world would change. It wasn't until I found that old letter hidden under the rug under my bed. There was a time I believed betrayal would come like a thunderclap, loud, undeniable, impossible to miss, but I learned it often arrives in whispers, in pieces. In polite little lies you're meant to swallow whole. The letter sat on my coffee table for 2 days before I opened it, 2 days where I circled it like it was something alive. I poured tea beside it, folded laundry beside it, pretended I had forgotten it was there. But it was impossible to forget. That envelope seemed to hum in the quiet, calling me to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted. When I finally slipped a butter knife under the flap, my hands shook hard enough to tear the paper. Inside, in my husband's handwriting, was a short note dated 23 years ago. Months before he passed, it was addressed to me, but the words weren't meant for my eyes. Asterisk if you're reading this, it means I didn't have time to explain. The savings, the account in your name, it's not safe. I've seen signs someone is trying to move the funds. I've taken steps to protect it, but if anything happens, talk to Harold at the bank. Don't trust anyone else, especially not family without proof. I read it twice before I understood. My husband had suspected someone in the family was trying to take our money before he died, and in the decades since, I had never known. My stomach knotted so tightly I could feel my pulse in my teeth. I thought of the strange withdrawals from my account over the past year, small enough to go unnoticed, large enough to matter if you added them up. I thought of the missing quarters, the strange smells, the missing key, and then, like a cruel puzzle piece snapping into place, I remembered something my neighbor Ruth had let slip months ago. Funny thing, I saw your daughter-in-law at the bank the other day. She looked like she was in a hurry. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, the memory burned. The next day, I walked into the branch my husband had mentioned. Harold was gone, retired years ago. The new manager pulled up my accounts and frowned. Mrs. Donnelly, he said slowly. Are you aware there have been repeated transfers into a joint account? Joint account? I had no joint account. Not anymore. Not since my husband passed. The names on the account stopped my breath. My son's name and hers. I asked how much. He hesitated. I told him I wanted the truth. He turned the monitor toward me. The figure glowed on the screen. And for a moment it didn't register. It was too large, too obscene to belong to me anymore. It wasn't all gone, but enough was missing that my future, the little safety net I'd planned for my old age, was no longer certain, and worse, it had been happening for months, quiet. Steady siphoning, not a smash and grab. Theft, but a slow bleed meant to keep me from noticing until it was too late. I left the bank with my heart pounding, and my hands cold even in my gloves. Outside, the sky was low and grey, the kind of Massachusetts winter day that presses down on you like a weight. Every step home felt longer than the last. That night, I got another text from my son. We're going to spend the weekend with her parents, maybe next week. I stared at the words. My thumbs hovered over the screen. I wanted to ask him if he knew what she'd done, if he'd helped. If the boy I'd raised to tell the truth had been standing beside a lie all this time. But I didn't, not yet, because in the pit of my stomach, I already knew, and then came the rumor that sealed it. At the church potluck, over the sound of trays being set down and chairs scraping across the floor, I heard it, to women talking behind me. They say she came home drunk when no one was watching. Had papers in her purse she didn't want him to see. Papers, bank papers. It was all there, if I let myself look. The missing money, the sudden coldness, the invitations that no longer arrived. And now, my son's silence in the middle of it all. My hands shook, my heart broke. I prayed and waited. There was a time I believed heartbreak announced itself with a siren, that you'd hear it coming in time to brace. It doesn't. It slips in like a draft under the door and makes a home in your bones. My hands shook. My heart broke. I prayed and waited. For 2 days I left the bank printouts in a neat square on the dining table, as if tidiness could keep them from being true. I passed them carrying laundry, set a mug down an inch from their edge, as if I might scald the numbers into repentance, turned the lamp just so, making shadows fall across the worst lines. Numbers don't blush, they don't apologize, they sit. I tried to make dinner the way I always do when the house feels too quiet, onions first, because they make a noise that sounds like company. The knife tapped the board and my breath went out of rhythm. I salted too early, burned the butter, stood with the pan smoking as if the kitchen could grieve for me. I put everything down and ate to crackers over the sink like a woman between trains. Sleep didn't leave so much as forget where I lived. I lay in the blue light and listened to the radiator clank its old song and counted the reasons I might be wrong. Maybe it was a banking error. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe I had signed something once in a fog of tiredness and this was all legitimate. Maybe the lullaby you sing to yourself when you don't like the Real tune. In the morning I made tea and forgot to drink it. The cup steamed itself into a small weather system and went cold. I reheated it, I forgot it again. The second time felt like failure. The third felt like a diagnosis. I kept moving, because stillness made a noise I couldn't stand. I polished the silver I use only for funerals and Christmas Eve, as if sorrow could be buffed out to a brighter shine. I changed the sheets, then changed them back, as if cotton could hold a decision. I refolded the quilt the way my mother taught me, corners kissing, so my hands could remember her. World where instructions were simple and the result certain. At church that Sunday the light came through the stained glass in bands of patient colour. The sermon was on generosity again. It always seems to be when you have little left to give, and the pastor said, "Give without keeping score." I thought, not unkindly, that he had never watched his name disappear from a future he paid for. I wanted to stand up and say, yes, give, but first learn the arithmetic of boundaries. And then I wanted to take it back because I was raised to keep the peace in rooms with echo. I sang anyway. My voice knew the alto line and went there on its own, that narrow path between showy and shy. Halfway through the hymn, my throat tightened and the words climbed into the wrong key and shook. There, like birds in wind, carol from choir slid one Kleenex into my palm without looking at me, the way women do when mercy needs to be discreet, when service ended. The foyer filled with coats and the smell of coffee and the small theatre of 100 lives. Resuming. I moved like a person on a moving walkway, carried forward by politeness. Ruth from the pantry asked, "How are you?" in that careful tone that means, "I know something and I won't say it unless you do." "Blessed," I answered. Because blessed is not a lie, it's just not the whole paragraph. At home the house had a new echo to it, like someone had rearranged the air. I held my phone and didn't text. I held it again and didn't call. I set it face down and it vibrated anyway. A calendar reminder that said family dinner. Bring rolls. I laughed out loud in the empty kitchen. It sounded like a cough. Sometime after dark I walked the perimeter of the downstairs the way you do when you've misplaced a thought and hope the walls kept it. The bench under the coat rack had a new scuff I didn't recognize, the blue planter on the back steps where I used to keep a spare key, empty. The quarter jar by the washer, lighter again, its clink thinned out like a promise cut with water. These were not crimes, you could tell yourself. These were household errors, accidents. Coincidence, but coincidence is just a lazy word for a pattern we're afraid to trace. I took out the little notebook I keep by the phone and wrote like a clerk for my own life. 11:10 p.m. checked quarter jar, light, blue planter, no key, mail, 3 opened envelopes of mine tucked into the circulars. Writing made the room steadier. Black ink put bones under a story that had been all whispers. The next afternoon, as the sky went that metallic Massachusetts grey that means snow will take what it wants, I pinned an old dish towel over the window by the door, not to hide the view, but to remind myself the view is mine. Then I did a thing I have never done in this house. I slid the chain on the door in the afternoon. The click was so small I almost missed it. My shoulders did not. Grief does a strange arithmetic in the body. You expect the heart to weigh more. Instead, your hands forget how to lift a teaspoon. You expect the mind to empty. Instead, it fills with lists, who to call, what to cancel, where to put the folder if there's a fire. I wrote my bank manager's number on an index card in fat letters and taped it inside the pantry, if that seems dramatic. You haven't yet been surprised by someone you love using your name to sign their hunger. A message arrived at dusk. She thinks space is best for now. We're fine. Don't worry. Do not worry. The two most useless words in English. I typed okay, love you, and stared at delivered like it might reply. When the dark settled in, shame came with it, wearing my old robes like a houseguest who refuses to leave. How could I have let this happen? How many times did I hand over a password as easily as pie? What did I teach him? This boy with my eyes that made him think my savings were a river he could step into and out of. At will, I put the kettle on to drown the questions. It hissed back, implacable. I stood by the window and watched the first flakes come down slow, the way they do when the sky is rehearsing. Street lights caught each one and auditioned it for beauty. Somewhere a car door shut, somewhere a dog barked twice and decided the night could handle itself. In the glass I could see my face and my mother's at once, the same stubborn mouth. The same eyes that won't quite cry until no one is looking. I put a hand to the pane and left a print there like a signature only I could read. The folder of papers wouldn't stop humming at the edge of my vision. I put it in the sideboard. Second drawer, under the holiday napkins, then took it out again because it felt like burying a live thing. I sat with it at the table. I stacked it, unstacked it, put paper clips at attention like little soldiers who might hold a line this time. I whispered a psalm I learned as a girl and forgot the middle, made up the rest. Trusted God to understand. It is a frightening kindness to realize you still have choices. It means the next part will require you to use them. The night gathered itself and I let it. I turned off the lamp, then turned it back on because light helps the truth behave. I smoothed the tablecloth. I folded my hands and then opened them, palms up, the universal sign for see. Nothing hidden. My hands looked older than yesterday. They also looked capable. My hands shook. My heart broke. I prayed and waited. And that's when I realized collapse is not the end. It is the room where you hear the door you need to build. But I wasn't yet ready to say it out loud. There was a time I believed plans belonged to the young, that plotting, strategizing, calculating was for people with decades ahead of them, not for women whose hair told the truth in silver. But loss is its own kind of education, and I learned that when the ground shifts under you, you can either dig for the roots or watch yourself be carried away. I wasn't old enough to be invisible. I was invisible on purpose. The decision came quietly, the way frost takes a window, one corner first, then the whole pane. I decided I would gather proof. Not feelings, not guesses, not the hazy outlines of suspicions, proof that could stand on its own even if my voice shook while presenting it. The first step was so small it wouldn't have looked like a step to anyone else. I went to the stationery drawer and took out a clean notebook, the nice one I'd been saving for a happier occasion. I dated the first page and wrote a title in neat, deliberate script. House ledger, every penny, every envelope, every unlocked door, every stray perfume in the hallway, it all went in. Exact times, exact words, exact dates, I wrote like. The truth was an animal that might run if I took my eyes off it. The second step was harder. I found my late husband's old address book and started making calls. Some numbers were dead ends, old friends long gone or moved away, but a few still answered. Harold, the retired bank manager, picked up on the third ring. His voice sounded older, but still held the firmness of a man used to counting what matters. I told him, without telling him too much, that something wasn't right. He hesitated, then said, "Check the safe deposit logs." Safe deposit logs. I hadn't thought of those in years. The next morning, I walked into the bank wearing the same wool coat I'd worn to my husband's funeral. The weight of it made me feel braced, armored. The young teller handed me the log book, and there it was, in black and white, my name, my signature, and beneath it, hers, my daughter-in-law, had been in my box. The signature was hers, but the permission was forged. I took a photograph of the page, then another, then one of my own signature beside it for comparison. My hands were steady now. From there, the plan grew. I visited the church office under the pretense of organizing the pantry ledger and slipped into the copy room to make duplicates of anything I'd photographed. I bought a small lockbox from the hardware store and hid it in the back of my linen closet behind the Christmas tablecloth I only used every other year. I called Ruth, the neighbor who'd seen my daughter-in-law at the bank, and asked her if she'd be willing to write down what she'd witnessed. She agreed, her pen scratching fast like she'd been waiting to tell it. I slid her note into the lockbox. Evenings became my quiet workshop. I would pour a cup of tea, lay out the papers on the dining table, and arrange them into timelines, deposits here, withdrawals there, visits that matched, absences that lined up like guilty little soldiers. I stopped answering my son's texts, unless they were questions that could be answered with one word. My words were precious now. They had to be saved for the moment they would matter most. I began to ask questions in ways that didn't sound like questions. Funny, I'd say on the phone, "I thought the bank closed early that day," or "I didn't realize you knew where the spare key was." I spoke them like weather observations, soft and harmless. But I watched the pauses on the other end grow longer. Meanwhile, I practiced. I stood in the bathroom and rehearsed what I would say when the time came to put my proof on the table. I practiced my voice until it held steel under the softness, until every syllable felt like it could stand without apology. I prayed too, but not the same prayers as before. Not for things to go back to the way they were, not for someone to feel sorry. I prayed for clarity, for courage, for the timing to be mine and not theirs. And with each page I filled in that notebook, with each photocopy slid into the lockbox, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, not sadness, control. And control, I learned, is the quietest kind of power, because when the time came, I wouldn't need to shout. I would simply open the box, lay out the truth like silver on Sunday, and let it shine so bright they'd have to look away. And that's when I realized sometimes the best revenge is done in silence, while the other side still thinks they're winning, but I wasn't yet ready to say it out loud. There was a time I believed revenge was a roaring fire, the kind that sweeps through and leaves nothing but ash behind, but I learned it doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes the best revenge is a match you strike in a silent room, letting the glow spread slowly until the shadows can't hide anymore. I chose my battlefield carefully, not the bank, not the church, not some cold lawyer's office where everything echoes. I chose my own dining table. The same one where my son had once dropped his backpack and told me about his first crush. The same one where my daughter-in-law had eaten pie I baked with my own two hands. The same table where my husband used to tap his coffee mug twice before taking a sip. If the heart of a family can be broken at the table, it can also be mended there, or at the very least, set straight. The opportunity came disguised as kindness. A text from my son, "We'll come by Sunday afternoon, bring that apple crisp we like." It was the first invitation in months, and I knew exactly why. Apple crisp was my peace offering, my olive branch, and they thought I'd bring it without asking questions. I baked it, of course, but I also set the table for 3. Plates gleaming, napkins folded into perfect triangles, my best silverware, the kind that demands you sit up straight when you use it. In the center, I placed the lockbox, not hidden, not wrapped, not explained, just sitting there like an honored guest. When they arrived, the air was tight. My daughter-in-law smiled too brightly. My son avoided my eyes. We made small talk about the weather, about the neighbor's new fence, about a recipe she'd seen online. The smell of the apple crisp curled between us, sweet and steady, like a reminder of better days. Halfway through dessert, I reached for the lockbox. My son's fork froze halfway to his mouth. My daughter-in-law's smile slipped a fraction, like paint over damp wood. "I've been tidying up," I said casually, fitting the key into the lock. Found a few things I thought you might want to see. The lid opened with a sound louder than it had any right to make. Inside, I'd arranged the papers in neat stacks, the bank logs with her signature, the safe deposit entry, Ruth's handwritten statement, the photographs, the timelines. Proof so clear even silence couldn't disguise it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply slid the first page across to my son. He looked at it, then at me, then back at the page. His lips parted, but no words came out. His wife reached for her fork again, as if pretending this was nothing would make it so. I slid the next page across, and the next, and the next. The paper between us became a wall they couldn't climb. Finally, I spoke. You've been taking from me for months. That ends today. Every cent will be returned, every account closed. And if it isn't, I let the sentence trail off, tapping the folder gently with my fingertip. I have copies, safe copies, and I know exactly where to send them. No shouting, no tears. Just the truth, sharp enough to stand on its own. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then my son nodded once, small, almost imperceptible. His wife's eyes darted away. We finished dessert in silence. The apple crisp was perfect, but no one tasted it. When they left, the plates were still warm. I cleared the table, sliding the lockbox back into the linen closet. The air in the house felt different, not lighter exactly, but mine again. It wasn't a victory parade. It wasn't applause or headlines. It was just me in my own home, with the knowledge that they would think twice before crossing me again. And sometimes that's all the revenge you need. And that's when I realized a quiet victory can echo louder than the loudest war, but I wasn't yet ready to say it out loud. There was a time I believed endings came with fireworks or final words carved in stone. But the truth is, most endings arrive the way dusk does, gradually. Until you don't remember when day became night, they didn't come around much after. That Sunday, a few texts, a strained phone call on my birthday, the occasional photo of the grandchildren, as if distance could be patched with pixels. I answered politely. But the warm weight in my voice was gone. It was not anger anymore. Anger burns itself out eventually, but a clean, deliberate boundary. The money returned in pieces, like an overdue debt paid with found coins, a transfer here, a check there, no apology note, no explanation. Just numbers climbing back toward where they had been before the taking began. I kept the same ledger, still noting dates and amounts, not because I needed the proof anymore, but because I liked seeing my life put back in order, one entry at a time. Neighbors noticed. Ruth would pause in her yard, leaning on her rake, and say, "You've got your spark back." I'd smile and change the subject, because not everything needed retelling. The pastor shook my hand a little longer than usual. After Sunday service, his eyes saying he knew something without asking, I started taking walks again, longer each time. Down past the pond, where the geese strutted like they owned the place, past the bakery with its chalkboard signs promising cinnamon rolls the size of your fist. I lingered at the window displays. Not to buy anything, but to remind myself that there were still new things in the world worth looking at. One afternoon, I found myself in the attic with a box I hadn't opened since my husband died. Inside were photographs, faded Polaroids, stiff studio portraits, candid shots where someone's eyes were always closed. I lingered over one of my son at 8 years old, holding a frog with both hands like it was a miracle. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just thought, this is the boy I raised. This is the boy I will always carry, even if the man has lost his way. I didn't forgive them, not yet. Forgiveness is a house you have to rebuild from the ground up, and I wasn't ready to draw the blueprints. But I also didn't carry the same heaviness. I had done what needed to be done. I had protected what was mine, and in doing so, I had protected something even more important, the truth of who I was. Life settled into a new rhythm. I baked. For myself, I planted tomatoes in the yard again, not to share, but to savor. I even joined a quilting group at the library. Letting the hum of quiet conversation fill the spaces where family voices used to be. Some nights I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the light fade from the street, and think about the woman I had been before all this. The one who believed trust was a door you left unlocked because love was enough to guard it. I felt a tenderness for her, but also a kind of sadness. She hadn't known that love, without boundaries, can be an invitation for harm. One evening, as I was closing the curtains, my phone lit up with a message from my son, just 2 words. "Thank you." I stared at it for a long time. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. I didn't reply, because this wasn't his story anymore. It was mine. And they told me age would make me smaller, but this was when I found my real voice.